Hey there, and welcome back to Transformers Fall of Cybertron. I've got another tutorial for you today that is going to teach you all you need to know about FOC textures. How they work, how to manipulate them, and how to install them without the need for TFC Installer. So let's not waste any time and get right into the show! So the first thing we're going to want to do is extract a texture set to experiment with. For this example, we'll be using Jazz's chest. We can find his textures by heading to the Extract Textures tab and searching for Jazz. All of FOC's character parts are made from two main textures, the color/norm X and the mask/norm Y. I'll explain how both of these textures work shortly, but for now, you're going to want to head up to the top right corner and click the Export button for both textures. These textures will show up wherever your working folder is located. If you're following the guide from my previous tutorial, this will be in Steam, Steam Apps, Common, Working Folder, Transformers Fall of Cybertron, Exports, PFDXT5. All part-based textures from the game will be exported here. Now let's get these opened up. I'll be using GIMP for this tutorial, but the procedure should be more or less the same for other image editing software. Let's start with the color/norm X texture. This texture provides two key components for a character. It is primarily used as the diffuse, or base texture, that holds all the default color data for the texture. You will notice that this texture is semi-transparent. That is because this texture has an alpha channel that is used for the x-axis of his normals. For those who don't know, normals are a map that apply details onto a model without actually having said details present on the model itself. Quite a clever technique, really. Anyway, the normals come in several different variations across different games, and I will explain how to manipulate different types of normals later, but for now, let's keep our focus on this texture in particular. One of the most common issues you'll find with working with this texture is getting a decent look at the texture without the transparency. There are a couple different options you have at your disposal to address this. First, if you don't have it open already, bring up the Channels window, which can be found under the Windows tab, Dockable Dialogues, Channels. It is here you will see four channels: red, green, blue, and alpha. The only one we're concerned with right now is the alpha channel. If you want to work on the texture without the alpha getting in the way, you can click on the eye icon to the left of the alpha channel, and it will disable the transparency. It is important to note, however, that while the alpha channel is disabled visually, it will still be affected by any changes you make to the image. To ensure nothing accidentally affects the alpha channel, click on the alpha channel box. Once it turns bright, the alpha channel will be disabled, and you are free to manipulate the texture without negatively affecting the alpha channel. There's not likely to be many events where you actually need to make any direct changes to the alpha channels in particular, but messing with them accidentally will often have very negative effects if you screw them up. I'll run through what some of those are later. Another option though is if you just want a simple diffuse texture, you can select only the alpha channel, and press left control and the comma, and it will fill the entire alpha channel with solid black, thus removing the transparency completely. Though it is helpful when skinning to have a solid background, you are never going to want to import a texture without transparency. Failure to include an alpha channel with your texture will result in a darker glossy shine appearing across your part. So you're always going to want to make sure that your final texture has an alpha channel. That's about all there is for the norm X texture. Let's move on to the mask/norm Y texture. Where the norm X was used for two parts of a character, this one has four. This is where the significance of channels really comes into play. Each channel provides unique data to a specific portion of a character. It is highly recommended that when working with the mask texture, that you only work with one channel at a time, as to not risk compromising another. This can be done by disabling all the other channels by clicking all the boxes that you're not currently working on, or, like I prefer to do, you can select a specific channel icon, drag it out, and work on it as a whole new layer. Let's demonstrate this by pulling out the green channel. The green channel controls the specular map. The specular map defines how shiny a texture appears and can also be used to highlight a color. In Fall's case, though, it's just for shininess. Fall's specular maps are pretty simple to understand. Darker sections appear extremely dull and matte, whereas brighter sections appear highly reflective and shiny. In short, the brighter something on the specular map is, the more reflective it will appear in-game. Generally speaking, you're not going to be very likely to mess with a specular map unless you need to reduce the reflection of an uncolored area, and some of that can probably even be managed in the material directly. That's the green channel. Let's close this down and move on to the blue channel. This is the channel you're most likely to be manipulating for this texture. The blue channel controls the primary and secondary colors of a character. White designates the primary color, black designates the secondary color, and everything gray is left as is. The gray in question uses the hex code 7B, 7B, 7B. And while there are several other textures that do have a slightly different gray value, mainly 84, 84, 84, 7B is the most common one and the one I'd recommend using. Now, manipulating this texture requires quite a bit of finesse to manipulate properly, as there are several key factors you're going to want to keep in mind while working with it. First and foremost, if you want to modify a specific section to register as a different color, you're going to want to first use color to alpha and wipe out all the gray background. Then, once you do that, you'll want to duplicate your layer. Then, use color to alpha again to take out the white for one layer, and then black for the other. After you've made each color its own layer, I highly recommend copying and pasting each layer above itself. This will tighten up some of the gaps in the scratches and make it match closer to the original image. Once you've done that, you are free to manipulate the primary and secondary colors as you see fit. You can delete a section, change its color by inverting it, or you can manually free-select a specific section and invert just that. It is highly recommended that you use a very tight edge while selecting a section, whether that be a feathered edge of 1.0 or no feathered edge at all. It is worth noting though, that due to the way Fall of Cybertron shading works, primary and secondary colors directly next to each other will often result in a bright white outline between the two, and the sharper the edge between those two, the more bold and apparent that white outline will be. Finally, we have the red channel, and this one actually has a bit of variation to it. This channel controls the energon glow and or the ox glow. The majority of these textures you'll work with won't look exactly like the one you see here, but that's the reason I chose it. The red channel comes with two possible variations. The one you see here, which has a gray background, and the other, more common one, which is just black. This type of texture is most commonly found on the head textures, as the gray background is mainly used for characters that have an ox glow, which is most commonly seen on heads to make the optics glow. But in Jazz's case, it is used for his rear chest lights too. It works exactly the same as the blue channel. White controls the energon glow, black controls the ox glow, and everything gray is ignored. This is, again, another texture you'll be very unlikely to mess with that much. But in short, take the same principles as used for the blue channel, and you'll be all set. Well, that's the basics of the textures themselves. But now, let's move on to actually making these texture sets from scratch. A good test of this would be to port a WFC texture over to Fall. For this example, we'll keep it simple and port over Bumblebee's vehicle textures. Open UBK Explorer and browse to WFC's Cooked PC folder and search for TR Bumblebee V. All of Bumblebee's vehicle textures can be found here. Just head to Extract Textures and export all 4 of them. Now, we're going to need to do the same thing for the FOC textures. Head to the FOC Cooked PC folder and search for the exact same file name and export both the Norm X and Norm Y textures. Once you have them extracted, head for the War for Cybertron section inside your working folder. Most of the textures will be in DXT1, but the normals will be found in DXT5. First, we'll start with our Norm X texture. Begin by opening the normals for B's vehicle mode. It is important to note that there are several different variations of normals that will require slightly different techniques to port over properly, but I'll cover that a little later. For now, head to the channels and drag and drop the alpha channel above your image. Make sure you re-enable your alpha channel after you drop it though. Now invert the colors of your image, then proceed to color to alpha and take out all the white in your image. Fill out the red, green, and blue channels with solid black, and that's it. That's the normal section all set up. Now we need the diffuse portion. WFC is unique compared to most games, as it makes use of a grunge texture to provide color where it is normally cooked by default for the majority of other games. With that said though, it will be necessary to know how to use this if you wish to port over WFC textures. Start by opening the DefSpec Loom texture, and drag and drop the green channel onto your image. Then take your grunge texture, paste it over your green base channel, scale it up to 2048 by 2048, ideally with the linear setting, and paste it as a new layer. Then you're going to want to change the layer settings to overlay. Finally, you merge the two layers using Ctrl-M on the keyboard, and there you have it. That's your diffuse. Return to your normal map, scale it up to 2048 by 2048, and paste it. But make sure your alpha channel is disabled when you go to paste it. Otherwise, it may override your alpha channel. And that is your Normex texture complete. For the majority of other games, you should just be able to copy-paste the diffuse straight from the RGB channels, just to make sure your alpha channel isn't active when you do so. And be sure to export it with the proper DXT5 compression and enable Generate MIP Maps. Now, we move on to the Norm Y texture. This will be slightly more complicated, but most of it is just straight up channel manipulation. Let's start with the normals again. This time, instead of taking the alpha channel, you want to drag and drop the green channel. Be sure to re-enable your green channel after you drop it though. And just like before, invert the normals and use color to alpha to take out the white, then fill the RGB channels with solid black, and that's your normal map all set up. And we might as well just upscale the whole thing now. Next, we have the spec. This one is real easy to set up. Head to your DefSpec Loom texture and drag and drop the red channel. Copy that and paste it into your green channel of your Norm Y texture, and that's it. You have your spec all set up. Next, we have the color masks. Open the WFC custom color texture, which will have a solid black background with flat sections of red and green. Red represents the primary color, green the secondary color, and blue indicates the ox glow, which we'll cover in more detail shortly. Drag and drop the red channel and use color to alpha to take out all the black in the background. It is also again recommended that you copy and paste your image over itself to tighten up any of the scratches so they don't bleed out as much. Now, do the same thing for the green channel. Once that's done, create a new layer below your extracted primary color and fill it completely with the 7B, 7B, 7B gray. And once you have that set up, be sure to invert the colors of your green channel so it appears black. Then, merge this with the other layers and paste it into the blue channel of your Norm Y texture. Finally, we come to the red channel, which has a few possible variations. The first and most common variety is a simple drag and drop of the blue channel from the DefSpec Loom and a paste into the red channel of your Norm Y. That finishes off this port for Bumblebee's vehicle, so we can go ahead and export this. But I do want to cover how to perform a 2-channel red texture as well. However, Bee's vehicle doesn't have any ox glow. So, for the sake of demonstration, I brought up Barricade's vehicle mode to cover this. First off, you're going to again want to drag and drop the blue channel, but this time, you're going to want to take out all the black via color to alpha. Then, head to your custom color texture, and drag and drop the blue channel, and use color to alpha to extract all the black again. It is also recommended that you copy and paste the image over itself, as the intensity of the glow has the tendency to get reduced after the color to alpha process. Then, input a new layer below your extraction, fill it with the same 7B, 7B, 7B gray, then invert your colors so that they appear black. Then copy over your Energon glow, which you can also paste over itself if you want. Then head over to your previous image, scale it up to 2048 by 2048, paste it in, then merge it, and you're all set. You'll just copy your final image and paste it into your norm-wise red channel, and you'd be good to go. Now, as I said, you may also encounter several different variations of normals as well. The most common one being this blue style, which features quite a bit more color. The same basic rules still apply here though. There's just a slightly different channel you need to take from. Instead of using an alpha channel for the norm X, you're going to want to drag and drop the red channel and use the exact same procedure. Invert it, use color to alpha to take out the white, and you're pretty much all set. You still use the green channel for the norm Y, so nothing's different on that regard. Now, with those points addressed, let's get back to our current textures. I'm going to show you another way to import them into the game. Head to your FOC Cooked PC folder and locate the UI lobby file. You're going to want to decompress this package in order to import these textures properly. The reason for this is that packages will corrupt should their file size exceed too much of what it originally was. Typically, this will result in a never-ending loading screen when you try to enter a level. So if you're doing any real hefty modding or importing a lot of new content, you'll need to decompress your package. You can get this tool in the link in the description, and it's fairly simple to use. Just drop your file on the decompressor tool, and a new folder will appear called Unpacked. That is where your decompressed package can be found. We can now take that and paste it into your mods folder. If you don't have one, just make one. You will notice that the file size is much bigger now, hence the decompression was successful. You are now free to modify this file to your heart's content. Now, to import the textures directly into the game without TFC Installer, head to LO2B Destroy All Mortars Base, and browse down to TR Metroplex Robo. Open Texture Sets and select Metroplex Texture File. For our purposes, the arm low will do fine. If you head to the file properties, you'll find the Never Stream property. This means the texture is loaded directly from the base file without the need to stream it from the game's other assets. And we can actually use this to directly modify any texture we want directly into whatever file we want. The downside to this is that you have to do it for every package you want to modify, whereas TFC Installer will affect every instance of the texture on its own. So that's something to keep in mind. So, we're going to export the texture 2D file. Not the DDS, mind you, but the texture 2D file. I already have both this and the norm Y exported already, but you get the idea. Once you've extracted both texture 2D files, open your modded package, browse to Bumblebee's vehicle texture set, and head to the import button on the top right corner. Select the NormX file and import it over Bumblebee's texture 2D file. You will see that Metroplex's texture has overridden Bumblebee's texture. Now do the same for the norm Y. Once both the norm X and norm Y have been replaced, click Save Copy and briefly close down the file. Once it's saved, open the copied file, head to the Extract Textures tab, and you'll notice that B's texture now shows up where they didn't before. You're now going to want to click Export DDS, then head over to your Fall of Cybertron's Exports folder and select your two textures, and move them to their respective imports folder. Now, you're going to want to take the name of your exported textures, copy them, delete the original texture, and paste the name over the respective texture. Be sure you get the name right, otherwise it will not show up in the Inject menu. Once that's done, return to UPK Explorer, head to the Inject Textures tab, and you'll see your modified textures no longer appear as Metroplex. Go ahead and click the Inject Textures button on the bottom left. This will save another copy of the file with your modified textures included. All it's left to do now is return to your mods folder, delete the original files, and rename your most recent copied file to that of the original. Once that's all done, we can head in game and see what we got. Alright, here we are in the lobby. Bumblebee, transform! Yeah, as you can see, the textures are transferred over to FOC quite nicely. It is a bit quirky with the FOC logo material slapped over the texture logos, but this was more of a simple port for demonstration purposes, and works well enough for our needs. Okay, that's the porting and importing for you, but before we close off here, I want to cover a few issues you may come across when importing textures into the game. Two of the most common problems you may encounter are either a part covered completely by energon, or a part that appears far brighter than it normally should. Both are the result of having a mismatched norm-wide red channel and material setting. A fully glowing part means you have a gray-red channel with a material that is meant to use a red channel with a black background. If a part is glowing brighter than normal, that means the opposite. You have a norm-wide texture with a black-red channel that has a material that is meant to use a gray background. You simply need to adjust your red channels accordingly to fix your appropriate problem. Another common issue is when your character appears strangely glossy or dark. This, as I mentioned earlier, is a result of an alpha channel lacking any transparency in your normals. This will require you to redo your normals for your texture and take all your RGB channels and paste them over your corrected normals. Finally, there may be some occasions where your character appears overtly shiny. This is a problem typically caused by having too bright of a spec. The simplest fix to this is to darken your green channel until you achieve your desired result. Generally, you're going to want to darken them pretty heavily. I usually like to go to brightness and contrast and take down the brightness by at least -127. You may have to do this multiple times to get your desired result, but you should eventually get there. And that should be all you need to know in regards to FOC textures. Hopefully this answered any questions you may have, and you now have a pretty decent understanding of how to manipulate these textures. If you need any additional help, you can post in the comments here, or head to the Transformers Modding Discord server. There's a lot of well-experienced people there who should be able to help you out. Alright, I'm going to close it off here. I'll see you in the next video. Happy texturing. See ya!